Welcome to Meeple Arts, a discussion of visual design for board games. I am Greg Grimsby, and let's get started with episode 1. All right, welcome. This is Meeple Arts. It's a discussion of visual design for board games. It's awesome that we have a special guest with us today, Andrew Bosley. Andrew, how about introduce yourself to those folks who don't already know the amazing artwork on that wall back there behind you. And we'll take a look at some of the cool projects that you've worked on and dive into the visual design of those projects.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm Andrew Bosley. I'm a freelance illustrator working mostly in board games. But that's a relatively new thing for me. I've spent most of my time in video game concept art, but left that a little bit ago and have been working for probably about the last 2 years, pretty much exclusively with board games, which I really enjoy. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Now, I want to jump in right on that question there. How did you make the jump from doing concept art in the digital realm to board games? A lot of commonality there, but how did you make that jump, and what are some of the differences that you've experienced between those two worlds?
Sure. I went to school I studied illustration in college, but at the time, there's always opportunities in illustration, but it was really ramping up towards visual development and concept art in the entertainment industry. And I'm old, so it was kind of the start of concept art being a more common thing with different entertainment industries. So anyway, I was actually hoping to get more into feature animation. I went to San Jose State University, and we had some really good connections with Pixar and DreamWorks. And so I actually got to work with some people there, and I'm giving you the long thing, but basically I left school, didn't have time to wait for animation. So I went into video games, went right away into concept art, working for a company called Red Storm, which is a Ubisoft studio out in North Carolina. And we were working on Ghost Recon titles. Tom Clancy titles, Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, but several other brands in the Ubisoft company, like Assassin's Creed and other stuff like that. While I was doing that, I knew I wanted to develop my illustration portfolio and look for opportunities to kind of build up my freelance career a little bit as well. And so I started out for many years. I was doing a lot of lower budget RPG type of illustration for people, and that's for different publishers, and that's even more of an overlap with board games. And as I was doing that, I would kind of go up the ladder a little bit with different clients. Eventually I started working I was working with Fantasy Flight for a long time in their RPG stuff, and slowly I was like, I enjoyed it, and the people there were fantastic, but frankly, in that market, there came a point where I was doing work for other clients that was paying just a little bit better than what Fantasy Flight was doing, and so I was like, hey guys, I love working with you, but the amount of time it takes me to do these pieces that you want and the amount that you're able to pay me is just doesn't make it worth it. So, let me know when, I'd love to do some of these other things, that might have, some better opportunities, or some of the bigger brands had a little bit more opportunities and a bigger budget and things like that. And eventually I started working on, I don't know if you're familiar with a game called Descent. But I did some covers for them for that, and then eventually, just out of the blue, this is already after I'd been working with them on, I mean, so many different. I did some art for Game of Thrones card game. I did some work for some Cthulhu card game stuff. I designed miniatures back in the day for Fantasy Flight. But anyway, after that was while I was still working at Red Storm, and then I left. I was going freelance. I was working still almost all the way in concept art, and then Fantasy Flight came to me again after all this time, and we had a good relationship. They said, hey, your style is a little different than the traditional stuff, and so not all projects were a perfect fit for me. But we've got this board game that we're working on called Mission Red Planet, and we'd really love for you to just take the lead on all of it. I mean, not the graphic design elements, but the illustration wise. This could be a really fun. It was a reboot. We could. Your style would work well for that. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. I had no intentions or no thoughts that it would be something that would be an opportunity that would allow me to continue, that would keep me in board games for a long time. The budgets between board games and video games are significantly different. And so I think that's a reason why a lot of concept artists don't come to board games immediately, just because it's like frankly a significant pay cut. It just worked out that I did that job. I really loved it. It was neat to kind of have to say, okay, here's a project that I worked on. It has my name on. Having worked in video games, especially in concept art, your name is not on anything, and people don't see your work usually. They see the end product that you helped to design, but you don't. It's not like your name is on that. That's fine. I always loved that process, but there's a little bit of a pride in me that was like, hey, an ego thing that's like, my name is right here, and I did all of this, and that was really neat. So that came and went. Then maybe a year later, I think, Fantasy Flight came back again, and they needed they were doing a reboot of Citadels, which was, both games were done by Bruno Faiduti, and that was neat. We have since become friends, and I got to chat with him at different times through the process, and then we've met and gone out to dinner and stuff when we could do conventions and such. And
right.
But anyway, that was it as well. I kind of thought of it as just a one-off job again, and then and there's a little more to it. But eventually, Everdell came along. I was actually designing a board game myself, a card game, and so I was going to Gen Con for a couple years before I even thought of the idea of marketing myself to board game publishers.
Wow.
I was going to go to the first exposure playtest hall to pitch my game to publishers and to get people feedback from playtesters and stuff. But eventually I was like, well, why am I not just reaching out to potential clients here with publishers? So ever since then, I would just go and reach out to people, and that led to working on Everdell and some other stuff. So that's the long-winded how we got to board games, and honestly, I've been very fortunate that since Everdell came out, it's really made the most sense to spend my time in board games, and I love it because I've always been a very serious board gamer. So it's been a nice place to call home.
That's awesome. I definitely want to comment on how board game projects do tend to be smaller projects, fewer artists. You might have maybe 2 or 3 artists, unless you're talking about like one of those big card games and has a dozen people working. But on the projects that you've been working on, you can make such a big contribution to that game. And I don't see it so much. I mean, I guess there is a pride element, but it's a satisfaction to know that you could have chosen to do this work or this work, but you did this work instead, and you can see your thumbprint on that work. And when players play it and they love the game, you know that in some degree, like your expertise and your love and your craft is what they're responding to. And I think board games and artists working in that space, they really can get that sense and that reward. And that sounds like you did respond to that aspect also. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was working in video games, one of the reasons I left, frankly, one of the reasons I left full-time studio work to be a freelancer, and why board games in general I find more interesting is I always felt like I wanted to affect more than just be someone else's hands. And in concept art, it's very rewarding, and it's a wonderful profession I'm very glad to have been in and still are in. But you're just kind of a tool in somebody's in somebody's belt, and you're really just helping someone else illustrate their vision of something that they're very excited about, and that's very fun. But I knew I had my own ideas, I had my own things that I wanted to do too, and it was made very clear where I was working, bless their hearts, that they're wonderful people there, but it was like, no, you have ideas, that's wonderful, but that's not your job. Your job is to do this, and this person is the guy who has ideas. And anyway, it's not like unless I'm working on my own board game, which I have done, I'm still illustrating someone else's vision. But when there's not 150 people working on the project, and it's just really you responsible for most of the art, and I need to give a whole lot of credit to the graphic designers that are doing this, because gosh, they really make the whole thing amazing. But to be one of two, and sometimes only the one person responsible for the artwork of something, you take a lot of pride in that, and it's neat to be able to say that was something I did. And so I don't know, this is part of that kind of big picture mindset that I kind of always liked, and to have my fingerprint on that, like you said, really was appealing for sure. So
awesome. Well, I'm excited to take a look at some of the work that you've done over the past couple of years in board games. So let's head on over to the art board and start talking about process. And I'm excited. So let's head on over there. All right, so we have just a smorgasbord of your awesome stuff here. And I think one aspect of this that I'm really interested in, and maybe we can go into just the visual development of an idea. And you have a couple of thumbnails here that we can zoom in on and talk about your development process, from just a sketch where you have just a small kind of either a style guide or just a small design brief, and how you go from that and kind of flesh out the idea and breathe in all that life. That's part of our jobs as artists, is to add in that detail and to make the world feel alive and believable. So if you want to start with either maybe the Everdell process, maybe kind of go over some of the inputs and your thinking on that one. I'll zoom in, and there's the end result perhaps, and then we can walk backwards and you can tell us how you got to there, and what were some maybe interesting redirections that you took.
Sure. Well, probably everybody's, or not everybody, sorry, that sounds stupid. More people are familiar with the final, of course, than some of the other preliminary stuff. But Um, uh, I guess it really does start. It does start with those earlier sketches. So if you want to pan over to those, I mean, I work in a very similar way with pretty much any artwork I do. When I'm in, particularly for bigger components, game boxes, very important pieces. There's a fair amount of ideation that goes on to come up with a good composition and something that's going to present really well for a cover, or things like that. There's sometimes a little bit less of that ideation. When if I've got 30 cards that I've got to do for a game, I might not. We don't go through the same process. And Everdell was a really great example of where Dan May, the art director and graphic designer for that, kind of let me run with the things that I wanted to do. So anyway, looking at this specifically, I knew I had obviously the basic dimensions that I knew I was going to be working with. I knew kind of the general layout as you have there. Like this might be in video games, but maybe the equivalent of a gray box, setup here, trying to usually we know ahead of time where text and stuff on the board or on the box is going to be. And so I'm working around that, but it's funny. I haven't looked at these in a long, long time, but it was a really fun to just kind of play with this world. So I had already had conversations with the team before I had started. I knew a little bit about the lore, not much, but I knew I had a chance to talk with them about what makes up this world. Is it a human world, but we're just seeing, we might see the influence of humans in the world, but it's just the animals that we're focusing on, or is this an animal world, and how do they build things? What materials do they use, and how important is it that we see those things? And so a lot of that stuff happened before I started. And if I'm remembering right, this is the first piece that I did for, no, I think I did the inn, and I might have done the innkeeper first, and I think maybe then this was the next thing after that. But
so Andrew, before you went in and did cards, like this was one of those kind of first like establishing pieces of key art that were going to define the look and how you were going to approach the architecture. So you're solving a lot of problems probably for the first time in these pieces.
Yeah. A little side note, I was just thinking about this as far as the process. It was getting this job, and I've always been a big fan of, like, I've read Redwall when I was a kid. I loved Secret of Nim, and all these kind of, there's just beautiful things that have been done. So I was approached about this project, and I was very, very much excited about it. But there was a little bit of a delay between, or a little bit of space between, okay, how much would it cost to do this, Andrew? Okay, this is how much it would cost. Okay, let me get back to you. And but as soon as they pitched this to me and they were talking about it, honestly, it was probably was a little bit of a leap for Dan May, who was the one who was approaching me, because I didn't really necessarily have anything in my portfolio that said animal art, but that's really what I loved to kind of do, and I had it ever since I was a kid. So actually, when they first approached this to me and I was waiting to hear back, as soon as they said, okay, we'll let you know, I started posting animal drawings on Instagram, and I'm pretty certain they saw it and knew what I was doing, and it was basically, I really want this, so I'm just going to get started working on some of these things anyway.
That's awesome.
And none of those pieces, it'd be fun is maybe I have those guys still that I did for that original time. I wonder if I should find a way to get those guys in the game sometime. But anyway, so I was very, very eager for it. But anyway, going back to all of this, so I gave them lots of these concepts, different ideas for stuff, and they were, I think, quite happy for a variety, for several of those things. But and they would get my feedback, what I preferred, what I liked. But ultimately, we went to this line drawing here that's on the top right. But interesting. I mean, again, it's been so long, I've forgotten. There's clearly some characters on there that are not on the final, and I guess they just didn't make the cut. And I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly why. But that lizard. I think he's the Wanderer normally, who had not been created at that time. Just, hey, let's put a lizard in there, and hey, let's put a waving chipmunk or squirrel or something in the bottom right. Well, they didn't make the cut, but or we changed them to something else. But the gist of the whole picture was really established here. I often put this at I say, having the line drawing done is about 25% of the artwork being done. And then once this is approved, we go down to the color rough, and this is really where, and this is really actually quite basic. Looking back, things have maybe changed quite a bit actually, but this is not very finished for what I normally do for color roughs. And when I've done it by the time I do the color rough, I kind of consider that 50% done. But there's a lot of lighting. This has some mood in it, but not a lot of lighting, honestly. Yeah. And so that's normally in my process. That's where it's not going to be polished. It's not going to be super pretty when you look at the individual brush strokes. But at this point, you should be able to get a really good idea of what it's going to feel like, what it's going to, the mood is going to be very clear and all that sort of stuff. And then that last 50% is just sitting down and grinding out the details and making things look pretty and polished. And so there'll be feedback and stuff along the way, and things will be added like butterflies and, locations of different things, but yeah, anyway, that's kind of the typical process for almost every single illustration I make. I go through a sketch, I go through a color rough, and I go to a final, and sometimes with a little less of the ideation at the beginning. But
so Andrew, it looks like there already is a lot of visual design exploration that's happening in here that, given how early this was in the process, just looking at this, you might not understand how many design problems you already had to solve. Like it looks like you're already thinking about architecture. You're establishing the kind of pastoral setting. You're doing some character design. You're of course dealing with color. I'm just fascinated that you front loaded a lot of those design decisions here in this piece. How much do you feel that it sounds like it was collaborative between you and was it Dan?
Dan.
Working through this, but it does sound like you had a lot of kind of leeway to establish some of these things. And did you find that there were like lines and shapes that you figured out here that you did kind of go back to, and we're going to use this kind of shape language throughout the rest of the piece, or these colors? Or if you look at this now and go, yeah, well, we changed a lot of this stuff as we went along?
No, I think honestly it was a dream project, and it always, I love any chance I can to go back to this, because they really were very honestly. It's like I was prepared for this job. Like, this is the type of stuff that I explored on my own. And so I don't know if I don't think there was a lot of true concept art for this game that we did, like where I was going, would we build things like this or we build things like this? We talked about it, and then they really Dan in particular just really let me run with things. And maybe it was, like I said, I think I did the actual card illustration, and the innkeeper first, if I'm remembering right. And maybe those were, having finished those and seeing the end result, I'm assuming they were happy with that, and said, okay, I think Andrew has a vision for this. And while I don't know if I necessarily had a vision, I was just painting it the way I would want to paint it based on years and years of daydreaming this type of setting, for myself. Because I was reading these things and thinking about it visually all the time, and drawing them just for fun. It was really a natural process for me. Other projects are not as natural as this one it was for me. So I think I assume that as we went along, they just kind of let me play. And so, yes, I was solving some of those problems in here. But I mean, for example, even to this day, I mean, I've worked on several expansions for Everdell. Mm-hmm. I think I can say that safely they just announced, I believe today, 2 new expansions and
awesome
that are coming out soon.
Congrats.
And sorry, through all of that, I remember the very first time that I painted an acorn with holes in it and decided that's what lanterns look like in Everdell. And that's what they are now.
Awesome.
I mean, there's other examples, but I always go back to, acorn lanterns. And that's just something that just nobody said. I mean, if I were doing this at Ubisoft or some other company, we'd probably spend a month designing the lanterns, for this, when they were just like, cool, awesome, go for it. And so
that's great. I want to kind of respond to some of your the formal decisions that you made on this piece. And what I really enjoy about this is how it's a wonderful sense of depth and atmospheric perspective that you've given this, with the warm, glowing background with little contrast, but just that brilliant palettes of the yellows, and then we come to the foreground, and it's also a very, very clean. There's not a lot of noise in the piece. It's just these broad brush strokes. And you didn't get in and put a lot of texture work into there. I mean, you're implying surface with just kind of, gestures and shape and form, but it's a lovely, lovely piece. I mean, I could see this. Thanks. People responding to this, independent of it being a cool board game. It's just a wonderfully executed composition and painting.
Well, thank you.
I love it. Well, you have done a lot of other stuff since Everdell, and I definitely want to spend some time looking at the new and great things that you're working on. So I'm going to zoom out, and I'll let you decide where you want to go from here.
Well, we could go in a chronological order if we want.
Okay. And where would that be?
That would, of the stuff we have there, I believe that's Tapestry.
Okay.
And then we don't have a lot of stuff here, but this was a really, really cool opportunity. I was very, very excited. I've always been a very big fan of Stonemaier games, and Jamie Stonemeier's designs, and I'm a huge Scythe fan. And so I was really, really, in fact, I had been thinking about reaching out to Jamie for something different. When within weeks of when I got an email from him and saying, hey, I've got a project and would you be interested in working on it? And I was very, very excited to jump on that. So what was an interesting difference with this project was I kind of took on a different or an additional role, which I don't normally do with board games or any other projects most of the time. And that's to kind of be the art director. And so I actually did get to bring some of that, the concept art video game side of things into this, where I spent about a month just concepting out the overall look for the game. So I was painting top-down views of the game before I was creating finished illustrations, just going, okay. And Jamie was, again, very trusting and very giving, allowing me to have some freedom to play around with this. So I was like, do you want me to come up with some ideas. I love some of the things that you've done with Scythe, and I would love to do this, with color and these sort of things with the game. How would you feel about this? And he was like, absolutely, go for it. And so I spent about a month just doing that. And, we were exploring, how do we, we got all these different mats and how do we put them together and how do they work with each other and things like that. And so that, and then exploring other visual cues and whatnot. In addition to that, I was also doing all the graphic design. I was, so every single icon on there, everything that is on that game I painted it. I'm not a professional graphic designer. I feel like I know I know the good principles of graphic design, but technically I'm not familiar. I don't use the software that most people use. And so there was an interesting process for me to figure some of that stuff out, but it was a really, really neat chance to kind of just give it a look that I thought would be fun. And Jamie was very open to that and very, what's the word? Encouraging.
Yeah.
And so we went that direction, and I think it turned out great. But at the same time, it was a chance to do some really fun illustration work, which I'm very, very proud of, but very different than Everdell. So it was a really interesting process because what we knew right from the beginning with this game, knowing that it was you were creating civilizations, we couldn't really do any world building because we weren't wanting to define a world for anybody other than here are what land masses might look like. But even those would change with every game. The tiles would change that you put down. So the world itself would look different every game. So in Everdell, where I had the chance to really do some fun world building through the illustration work, this was less so. It was, but still, like, as much as I could, I was trying to put some sort of, world building is more than just when it comes to the art side of it. It is a little bit more than just backstories and things like that. It's just feeling that there's some immersiveness to the world itself, and I hope that's something that's come across in the art, even if it's not telling a really deep story. But it was a wonderful project, very rewarding, and we have one expansion that is announced or that's done and out, possibly more.
Awesome.
But yeah.
Andrew, could I ask you, you mentioned software and how perhaps maybe you use some tools that might be a little atypical to maybe what a graphic designer uses. So maybe just spend just a brief moment talking like programs, favorite tools for folks who are interested in that kind of get the
sure.
fingers dirty kind of stuff.
Yeah. So Photoshop is my main program that I'm working in or have. All of my career has been spent 98% of my time is in Photoshop, just painting. And I've used a variety of different tools on my home computer setup. I have a Cintiq that I'm working on in Photoshop, but I actually spend most of my time these days on my iPad and my Apple Pencil, and I'm sitting on the couch watching TV while I paint a whole bunch. So Photoshop for sure was where I started with digital art. But I work now, when I'm on my iPad, I work in an app called ProCreate, which is a fantastic app. And I've been with ProCreate and been a fan for a very, very long time, as long as it's been in existence. I've been following it and using it, and it's been amazing because the way they've updated it. I mean, it's just like Photoshop. It's gone through many years of development and improvements, but every time they made an improvement, it was really something that helped simulate the process that I was used to working in Photoshop. And so it was a natural, really just easy transition to work in ProCreate. Now I've worked with it enough. I've and I have a relationship with the company that made it. I've done tutorials for them through ArtStation, and anyway, it's now my workhorse is ProCreate, and I will for pure illustration. When I do need to do stuff that's graphic design or text based, even though there is some of that in ProCreate, just barely, I always then export it to Photoshop, and I'm working there. I don't know. I'm horrible at Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. I am even worse if it's possible. I'm even worse at InDesign, and I like so desperately need to learn these programs because I want to see at least for my personal projects, I want to understand those tools better because I thinking big picture again. I have ideas and projects I want to work on that I'm not planning to contract out certain elements of it. I need to do it myself, so I need to kind of grow up and learn those other programs. But
awesome,
I've been able to get away with it so far.
Definitely, very cool. So that's an interesting position to be in, to be the art director and the illustrator and the graphic designer all at once. It's just a lot of decision making, a lot of control, absolutely. But then again, also just so much work. And I bet on this project you really had to talk with the designers constantly, maybe more than you were used to just doing illustration. Did you find that to be the case? And did you find that your expertise shaped any of the gameplay, or the designs were so good and so tight that you were just pure on the visual side of things?
That is a funny question. In this particular case, I hope Jamie doesn't mind me sharing some of this. It's not unusual, having now worked with a lot more people now than I had maybe at that time in board games. In fact, no, I did not. I mean, Jamie was the designer, so I was in communication with Jamie all the time. But he's very busy. It's very at times. I think with this first project, it was a little bit. It wasn't harder to communicate with him. It wasn't, but the game was kind of still in development. I think Jamie was. He wanted to give me a final product, which makes a lot of sense. So but I was starting early enough that there were still some things that needed to be figured out gameplay wise. So I had to make some decisions, or I mean, I had to do some things, and I hadn't played the game while I was doing this. I saw Jamie recorded a video of the game being played, a few rounds, and then so I would take that. So there was a little bit of a disconnect at the beginning of just trying to go, okay, what exactly are we doing? Because I wanted, player mats, for example. I was concepting those out at the beginning, going, okay, we want this player mat to be next to this player mat, the civilization mat next to the income mat next to the, what other stuff, the tech cards and things like that. And I wanted them to all fit together really, really well and make sense. And so I needed to know, okay, how is this game played? What are we doing with these components? I had a component list. I knew what was needed to be made in the end, but how did they interact with each other was still being not totally being figured out, but there were still some things that changed occasionally as I went along. So no, I did not have, in this case, it did not have any influence on gameplay for sure. But I don't normally. I consider myself a game designer. I have some games under my belt, but that's not what my role was, and that rarely comes into play. But sometimes it does for some games and some clients. But yeah, I mean, in the case of this, it really was purely a visual art direction that I was spending most of my time thinking about. What, I mean, I never created a real style guide or anything for the game, but I knew what type of colors I wanted to work with, and I knew kind of what the, I call UI elements, the things that are going to be up on, that are not part of an illustration, but are on top that give space for the graphic design. What are those going to be made of? I used a lot of scrolls and things like that, which I just am a sucker for, old, rolled up scrolls and stuff. So whenever I have a default, I need a space to put some text, I put a scroll there somewhere, there you go. Or whatever. And that anyway, that worked fine for this, but so it was a lot of those decisions, along with the graphic design, the icons and the things like that I was just like, okay, I would say, having some game design knowledge, it was important for me to know, okay, these icons need to be very clear, and I don't want there to be explanations, and I don't want a Q&A section, or I know Jamie wouldn't want a Q&A section at the end of the rule book. If it can be avoided. So let's make these as clear as possible. Let's make, all of that stuff. So I think all of that, Tapestry was a great game where all of my various board game expertise kind of came together into one place. And so it was a challenging and unique experience, but very, very fun.
Super. I want to maybe talk about one or two of these before we wrap up for times, but I'll let you decide which of these you want to focus in on. I know I'm interested in this development of this piece, but these animals are just lovely also, and whatever
sure.
Whatever you want to dive in on here.
I won't spend a lot of time because I don't have a lot of art for this particular project, but there's a game that's been announced for Floodgate Games, which is Vivid, which is a really, really cool game that I'm excited that I had the chance to work on, and will be released in the future, but has been announced. The cover at least has been shared. And that's that one with the elephant and the girl running in front of it. And that's something I'm very excited to see move forward. But I'll go ahead and talk about the other game, which more people would be familiar with. It hasn't been printed and fulfilled yet, but it was on Kickstarter recently, sometime last year. I can't remember what time last year, but that's Merchants of the Dark Road. And that was a really, really fun project. Probably not since Everdell, and there's lots of other projects that are not represented here, but lots of other projects I had a chance to work on. I don't think it was Merchants was kind of the next time that I really, really got to jump into some world building elements, and I'm really, really pleased with the way it came out. I mean, we don't need to talk about the individual character and animal illustrations, but they're there. They're an important part of the world, and the not those necessarily those specific characters, but the idea that there's companions, that you're a merchant and you are taking people to different locations on the board, and you might have companions that you use that join you, animal companions that affect your gameplay, and so it was really fun to work on those, and those heroes that are down below are a couple examples of, I don't know, I can't remember, 35, 40 different heroes that I created for the game here, and they are passengers that you might put on your, that you might be hired to carry with you as well. And they were tons of fun to play with, lots of fun to explore, a lot of chance to put some great diversity in of characters. And that was something that was and not just the characters themselves, kind of representing different races and gender or anything like that. In addition to that, it was really lots of fun as well to explore just different cultural influences in clothing and other things like that. So being a fantasy world, it's not like, there is a Roman Empire or anything like that, but maybe there would be hints of that stuff, and combining that with, the Byzantine, style iconography or whatever, it was lots of fun to explore with that. The board itself, which is over onto the left, was a really fun process to work on. That was it one of the first things I worked on? That I remember this was one of the first things that we talked about when I was working with this team. I actually met the team from Elf Creek at Gen Con the year before I started, and I got a chance to play the game. And we just had this, again, a prototype board with not a lot going on other than text and gameplay stuff going on there. And I needed to interpret that into something that would be thematically interesting. And so right from the get-go, if you want to scroll up to the top, there was an interesting thing. This looks like just a silly little sketch, a little line drawing out there at the top. But one of the things that I thought would be really neat to do is try to take this top-down board and put it into some perspective. I don't, when I can avoid it, I try to stay away from pure top-down boards because I just don't feel like they are as immersive. And I love a cool board that feels like you can be in that space, and you're looking down at it, but it's a real environment, not just a graphic representation of a place. And so putting some perspective on that was a big part of it. And so I was playing around. I knew, certain with the way the game is made, I couldn't change. There's lots of things I can't change, but there's some things I could. And so, I sent them actually both of those images. The first thing was like, hey, here's kind of a hint at some perspective, because, we're thinking that this city is set on a cliff, and down below are the villages you might travel to and things like that. How can we get that perspective? How can we get that feeling of depth, in this type of view? And so I shared that first thing, making sure that those lines in there represent paths that are important, that had to stay where they were for the game, and then try to put something on top of that. So then we went to a sketch and like it did for that middle image. And then there was a color rough stage that I don't have here, similar to the others, the same process I go through, and then go into final with it. And this one is a perfect example of like, I'm very proud and happy of the way the illustration came out, but man, Matt Paquette, I had the pleasure of working with Matt Paquette, who's a fantastic graphic designer. I've worked with him a few times now. And when he did all the work and put all the graphic design on that, and I first saw that, it just blew me away. So like, I love painting this, but man, when the graphic design stuff was finally on it, it was like, that's just it was the graphic design that made it.
So Andrew, when you do a piece like this, are you doing this as one big plate, or are you doing it with different layers so that if you need to provide more spacing between these different elements, you have that flexibility? Or does it, I'm sure it depends on a piece by piece basis, but this looks like this was probably a pretty complex document that you had the ability to maneuver around if you needed to.
It's interesting. I don't, there's different ways of working. And especially I learned this as a concept artist, you need to be able to adapt and adjust things as you go. So there are give and takes to the way that different people work and with this sort of thing. So if I worked on, say, like one large plate, it might be really easy for me to move things around because I'm just taking a thing and shifting it. But obviously that has its challenges as well. The way I work allows me some flexibility and some things I can change easily, but other things I can't. So when I work, I have a line drawing, and then that's approved. And this is exactly how I worked with this piece and pretty much every other piece that I work on. Once that line drawing is approved, then I know the composition, I know where the shapes are going to be. I block out the shapes for the foreground, say, or then the background or different elements, and set them apart. And then I'll block in the local color, which is just what color is this roof? What color is the side of this building? What color is the snow? What color is whatever? I will color those elements very color by number almost. But then I put a layer on top of that, which will allow me to isolate just the lighting. And so I'm painting the form. I'm painting the lights and darks in there. And then I'll put some another layer in Photoshop or Procreate will be a layer of highlights. And it's not till that color, and that's how I do my color rough. And then once that's approved, then sometimes I will squash all that down, but still isolate the foreground. So I'll take all the light, highlights, shadows, and local color of this foreground element, and I will flatten that into one thing that I paint. I'll do the same with something that's in the middle of the, midground area. And then I do the same for the stuff that's in the background. In the end, that allows me the flexibility to change color, change lighting. It does not make things easy to move around.
Right.
But because I work in separate layers as well, I'm able to do that too. So in the case of this, like I believe, all the clouds were on a separate layer. So if those needed to be moved around, which they did at some points in the process, I could do that. But I've found that I place more value on making sure that the mood and the lighting are correct. And so sometimes those need to be changed. And if I had painted like on one layer and had painted all the lights in the dark, and it's just like I'm painting on a canvas, to change that really means I have to start from scratch. And so that's the type of stuff I try to avoid if I can.
So it sounds like, at least in terms of this, I know some illustrators, they work in grayscale and then they color, and other folks, they work directly in color. It sounds like you were working in something like grayscale and then you colorize on top of that.
Just the opposite, but basically the same process. Okay. I will, if I were painting me, I'd be painting just a plain dark blue sweater, lighter blue shirt, black hat, really pale skin, and it would just be solid color. There would be
no form shading,
no form at all. And then because then I've isolated that one thing. So if I decided I don't want to be wearing a blue shirt, I want to be wearing a red shirt, that's literally 5 seconds of change. But then I paint the lighting, the shadows on top of that. And then again, if my art director or, my client, someone says, we actually need to have the light coming from this direction, not from this direction. Again, I'd have to repaint everything. But if that change came along, it would be relatively easy to fix at that point. And so, it's flipped, but it's sometimes I actually do flip it that way. Sometimes I have a character in the foreground and it is just gray. And then I come in and I will put the form in there first. And then I paint the color on top of, underneath it on the lower layer, and it's all coming to life, but it's really the same process.
Awesome. Love talking process.
That's so technical.
Yeah. You mentioned art direction, and that leads me to maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up. You've worked with a lot of art directors. You've been an art director. What do you feel is the most important thing that an art director can do for the members of the team that they're working with, whether you're receiving art direction or whether you're giving that? What are some specific things that you have done or an art director has done that you went, wow, that was like really helpful and I don't normally get that, or this is what I like to get and it's super helpful. It saves me time. I'd love to pick your brain on what artist art director relationships do you feel are really successful, and what makes them successful?
That's a great question. I have an answer that I feel very strongly about, but it's not terribly sexy of an answer. It's pretty much project management, team management type of stuff. But I remember being taught by a good friend back at Red Storm. I was looking to build my art direction chops back when I was working there, and I remember this good friend who was an art director there kind of saying, some art directors, they put a dot, on a piece of paper, and it's this tiny minute thing, and they go, that's what I want. That's it. And sometimes, and most of the time, they're not very good at saying exactly what that represents in an entire project, but it's like, that's what I want. That's it. And they might not even know. So they have to task a team with creating that one. My art direction is this tiny point. And my friend pointed out it really should be more like a large dotted line of a circle. And so art directors that I've enjoyed working with, of course, they have a huge responsibility. They're responsible for making sure the overall look is something that's consistent, that looks good, that meets the needs of the client, that meets the needs of the whole vision for the game, which I'm not a part of when it first starts. But they don't come in with this very, very narrow thing. They go, okay, these are the things, here's this circle. It's really important that this is in there, and it's really important that this is in there, but everything else, I'm going to let you figure this out, and you as a professional who knows what they're doing and have experience creating, in my case, creating artwork. I'm not going to micromanage that process so much by saying you have to hit this tiny, tiny little thing. These are the things that are important to me. So if you hit those things, that's great. Then we can move on. That's really a very, I think it's a very valuable lesson I learned. And I feel like I've had the chance to apply that. And I've seen wonderful art directors who worked in that way. And I think I think the projects were much more successful that way. And I think everybody individually felt like they had more to contribute during that process. And unfortunately, I've worked with lots of people that are the opposite of that. They'd have that little thing, and it's like everybody's time is wasted. And we were just constantly trying to read one person's mind and understand what they want. And usually we don't get there, and then they're frustrated, we're frustrated. And it's a horrible, horrible thing. But as an artist, that's kind of the lottery. I pull the arm down with a new client. Perhaps it's like, okay, am I going to get the first or the second? And most of the time I get the wonderful art directors. And that's what makes the job for me fun. Because I consider myself first and foremost a commercial artist. I want to please my clients, but there is still an artist in me that feels like there's some value in personal expression that I bring to the table that is different than anybody else, not better than anybody else, but different. And I hope that when someone hires me, they want that. And so I appreciate when that happens. They're not. That makes the process wonderful.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I would like for you to give our watchers a chance to tell how they can get in contact with you or just to see your great artwork. So if you have Instagram, Twitter, email, or something like that you want to share, that's awesome.
Yeah. Sure. So I'm actually not on social media anymore. I made big leap and decided that was not a place that I necessarily wanted to spend a lot of time. And so I am not on social media. I have accounts so people will find some artwork there, but I always lead people to my website. I have a newsletter. My website is bosleyart.com. And I have a newsletter that I try to send out regularly, though all my people that are currently subscribed to that will tell me that's not the case. But at least I'm not spamming anybody, that's for sure. But that's the best way to stay up to date on the things that I'm doing, including the personal projects that I have several in the works that I'm very excited about. There's some pretty big announcements that will be being made with very specific projects that are part of my personal brand, Wits End Studios. And so if anybody, but my email is on my website. It's Andrew@bosleyart.com, and I welcome anybody who has questions or thoughts or want ideas or whatever. Reach out to me anytime.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And Andrew, I appreciate your time. It was so fun to look at your amazing art, talk about process and talk about the visuals and how they evolved and everything. So again, thank you for your time. And for my watchers, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for our next video broadcast. And thanks for watching. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye, guys.
Thanks to Andrew for being our guest. If you have any feedback or questions, please email me at greg@meeplearts.com and visit the website meeplearts.com. Thanks for watching.